God's sovereignty is absolute. That means he doesn't merely influence events. He governs them. He doesn't just observe history. He writes it. He isn't waiting to see how things play out. He already knows the end from the beginning because he declared it. Psalm 10:19 tells us, "The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his sovereignty rules over all." That one verse says everything we need to know. God is on the throne, and his reign is total, not partial, not conditional, not up for negotiation. His rule is over all, the visible and the invisible, the natural and the supernatural, the personal and the global. If it exists, it's under his authority. When we talk about God's control, we're not talking about the kind of control that manipulates or coerces. We're talking about the authority of a righteous king whose justice is perfect, whose love is unfailing, and whose knowledge is complete. God doesn't miss a detail. There's not a single molecule in the universe that moves without his permission. The sun rises on time because he told it to. The oceans stop at the shore because he set their boundaries. Seasons change, planets rotate, and gravity holds because he is in charge of all of it. Colossians 17 says, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." That includes galaxies, governments, and your life. Let's bring that down to your world. You may feel like everything is out of control. Bills piling up, health failing, relationships falling apart. Maybe you're walking through a season where nothing makes sense. You've prayed, fasted, cried, and still feel stuck. That's where this truth hits hardest. Because if God is truly in control of everything, then even what feels chaotic to you is still submitted to him. He's not pacing the floors of heaven, unsure of how to respond to your crisis. He's not shocked by your diagnosis, worried about your bank account, or surprised by your heartbreak. He's already factored in your struggle into his sovereign plan. Think about Job. His life was ripped apart, family gone, wealth stripped, health destroyed. But behind the scenes, God was still in charge. Even Satan had to get permission to touch him. That's control, not just over circumstances, but over the enemy himself. God never gave Satan free rein. He set boundaries. And those boundaries were ultimately used for Job's refinement, God's glory, and the defeat of the enemy's lies. That's sovereignty. That's how God works. But let's be honest, this is hard to swallow when life hurts. That's why it's important to understand that God's control doesn't always mean comfort. It means confidence. It means that no matter what I face, I can walk through it knowing that nothing touches me unless it's been filtered through God's hands. Even if I don't understand the why, I can trust the who. Because if he holds the whole world, he can hold me. God's sovereignty also reminds us that we're not running the show. That's a freeing truth, because trying to carry what only God is meant to carry will break you. You weren't built to manage the universe. That's his job. Your job is to trust, obey, and surrender. That doesn't mean you're passive. It means you're positioned under his rule. You live, move, make decisions, and plan, but always under the covering of his supreme authority. It's not about you taking control of your life. It's about recognizing who already has it. So when the news is bad, when the world feels unstable, when your plans fall apart, remember that God's sovereignty is not shaken. His control is not threatened. And his throne is not empty. The king still reigns, always has, always will. God works through everything, even chaos. That truth is not just comforting, it's foundational. It means that even when life looks like it's unraveling, it's actually being stitched together by invisible hands. Even when the pieces of your life seem scattered, they're never outside of God's reach. Romans 8:28 declares, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose." Notice that it says all things. Not just the good things, not just the things we understand, not just the blessings and breakthroughs. All things includes the setbacks, the pain, the confusion, the loss, and the moments that make no sense at all. We live in a world marked by disorder. Turn on the news and you'll see chaos, wars erupting, economies shaking, people divided. Walk through your own life and you might feel it too. Broken relationships, health battles, spiritual droughts. But what this verse in Romans teaches is that God doesn't need peace and perfection to get to work. He's not a clean-up crew that comes in after the storm. He's the sovereign creator who works in the storm. He's not waiting for the mess to clear before he moves. He's moving in the mess. The story of Joseph in the book of Genesis is a powerful example. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned, his life was a portrait of chaos. But when we get to Genesis 50:20, Joseph tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." That's divine purpose woven through human pain. What others meant for evil, God were routed for his glory. Joseph's suffering became the very path God used to position him for leadership, save a nation from famine, and reconcile a broken family. Chaos didn't derail the plan. It was the plan. Not because God approved of every evil act, but because he is powerful enough to bend even evil to serve his good purposes. That's the kind of God we serve. He doesn't just tolerate brokenness. He transforms it. He doesn't just fix what's fractured. He forms beauty from it. Isaiah 6:1-3 says he gives beauty for ashes, which means you can bring him the worst, and he can still bring out the best. That kind of redemption isn't accidental. It's strategic. God is the only one who can take what the enemy tries to use against you and flip it to advance you. But there's something important to understand. God's ability to work through everything doesn't mean everything feels good. Pain is still painful. Grief still hurts. Confusion is still confusing. But faith says, even if I can't see it, I trust that God is still doing something in it. You don't have to deny the difficulty. You just have to trust the direction. God doesn't waste anything, not your trials, not your time. Every chapter of your story, even the ones you wish you could tear out, are being used to write a greater narrative. And sometimes it's the chaos that gets our attention. Sometimes God allows a disruption so that he can bring about a redirection. Sometimes he shakes what's around you to reshape what's within you. In those moments, it's not that he's absent, it's that he's active. His work isn't always visible, but it's always visible. Like a seed in the ground. Things may look dead, but something is happening below the surface. So if you find yourself in a season that doesn't make sense, don't assume God has checked out. He's not just in the victories, he's in the valleys. He's not just in the calm, he's in the chaos. And what he's doing now, you may not understand today, but one day, like Joseph, you'll look back and say, God was working the whole time. Earthly power is temporary. God's power is eternal. That truth should bring both humility and hope. Human leaders, kingdoms, and empires may rise with strength and swagger, but eventually they all fall. No matter how influential or intimidating they appear, they do not have the final word. History has proven this again and again. Every throne established by man has a lifespan. It can be overthrown, corrupted, or simply fade away. But the throne of God, it is established forever. Psalm 14:5-13 says, "Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures through all generations." That means there has never been a moment, and there never will be a moment, when God is not in charge. The book of Daniel offers a clear picture of this contrast. King Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of Babylon, thought he was invincible. He boasted about his power, his palace, and his accomplishments. He looked at his kingdom and said, Is not this the great Babylon I have built by mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Daniel 430. In his mind, he had built an empire with no end. But in the very next moment, God humbled him. Nebuchadnezzar lost his sanity, was driven away from people, and lived like a wild animal for 7 years. Why? Because he needed to learn that human power is on a leash and God holds the leash. Eventually, Nebuchadnezzar came to his senses and declared in verse 35, "All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth." That's a confession from the mouth of a man who thought he was in control, until he met the one who truly is. God's power is not borrowed, not shared, and not threatened. It is eternal, unshakable, and supreme. This truth should remind us not to place our trust in human systems. Governments shift, leaders change, laws are rewritten, economies fluctuate, but God remains the same. Hebrews 13:8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. That's stability you can build your life on. Something divine. That's power you can depend on when everything else is crumbling. We often give too much weight to human authority, as if people determine our destiny. But no boss, no politician, no influencer holds your future. People can block opportunities, but they can't stop purpose. They can oppose your progress, but they can't overrule God's plan. Scripture says, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse wherever he pleases. Proverbs 2:1. That means even those in charge are under God's charge. Even those in power are still subject to the power above all. At the same time, this truth should keep us humble. No matter how successful we become, no matter how high we rise, we are not self-made. Our breath is borrowed. Our time is temporary. Our influence is limited. That's why we are called to steward what we've been given, not to cling to it as if it's ours to keep. The minute we start to believe we're the center of the story, God will remind us who the author is. Something divine. Either you're discouraged by the chaos of the world or tempted to depend on your own strength, remember this: God's power outlasts them all. He's not moved by headlines. He's not shaken by elections. He's not limited by the same forces that limit us. And when everything else fades away, he will still be standing, still reigning, still sovereign. That is the God we serve, one whose power is eternal, unchanging, and unmatched. Faith means trusting when you can't see the outcome. Something divine. That's the kind of faith that matters. Not the faith that's based on perfect circumstances or visible results, but the kind that holds on when everything around you looks like it's falling apart. It's easy to believe when the path is smooth, the doors are open, and the blessings are flowing. But true faith is forged in the fire of uncertainty. It's in the waiting, in the silence, in the moments when prayers seem unanswered and direction feels unclear. That's where faith is tested and proven. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Not seen. That's the hard part. We live in a world that craves control, that demands explanations, that wants guarantees before it steps forward. But God calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. He calls us to trust his word even when we can't trace his hand. That means we keep moving forward, not because we understand everything, but because we believe he does. Abraham is a powerful example of this kind of trust. In Genesis 12, God told him to leave his country, his people, and his father's household, and go to a land that God would show him. Not a land already shown, not a location with a map or GPS coordinates, but a future yet to be revealed. Abraham obeyed, not because he saw where he was going, but because he trusted the one who was leading. That's faith. It doesn't demand full disclosure. It responds to divine instruction. In our lives, God often gives us enough light to take the next step, but not always the full picture, and that's intentional. If we saw everything ahead of time, we might try to control it, change it, or even run from it. But by giving us just enough light for the step we're on, God is teaching us dependence. He's saying, trust me more than you trust what you can see. There will be seasons when God feels silent, when heaven seems quiet and your prayers echo back unanswered. But silence doesn't mean absence. Just because God isn't speaking doesn't mean He isn't working. Faith means saying, I don't know what's coming next, but I know who's already there. It means believing that God's delays are not His denials and His timing is not off. It's perfect. Trusting God in the dark is not blind faith. It's faith with your eyes open to His character. When you know who He is, you don't have to know what He's doing. When you're anchored in His goodness, you can ride out the storm even when the waves keep crashing. You can say like Job, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job 113:15. That's not passive faith. That's defiant trust. That's a declaration that even when everything hurts, I still believe God is good. And let's not forget that faith isn't just about surviving. It's about walking forward. The Israelites had to step into the Red Sea before it parted. Peter had to step out of the boat before he could walk on water. Trust often looks like movement before the miracle. It means obeying when it doesn't yet make sense, giving when it feels risky, and praising when you haven't yet received the breakthrough. So no matter what season you're in, if you can't see the outcome, you're not alone. That's exactly where faith comes alive. Trust doesn't require sight. It requires surrender. God never asked you to figure it all out. He asked you to follow Him, believe Him, and keep walking. Even when you don't know where the road ends, you can rest in knowing who wrote the journey. And He's never lost a traveler who chose to trust. Peace comes from alignment with God's authority, not from circumstances, not from achievements, something divine, not from everything going the way you planned, but from being properly positioned under the rule of the one who holds it all together. Peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of God in the middle of them. And when your life is aligned with His will, when your heart is surrendered to His purpose, you can have peace even in the storm, because you know who's steering the ship. We live in a world where people are constantly searching for peace in relationships, in careers, in money, in temporary fixes. But real peace can't be manufactured by external things. It's a byproduct of divine order. Isaiah 2:6-3 says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." That kind of peace doesn't come from trying to be in control. It comes from trusting the one who already is. When your mind is set on Him, when your will is submitted to His, peace becomes the default posture. Not because life is perfect, but because your soul is anchored in the one who is. A life out of alignment with God is a life in tension. It's like trying to drive a car with wheels that are out of sync. You can go forward, but it's going to be rough, unbalanced, and hard to control. In the same way, when your life is not lined up with the principles and priorities of God, you'll feel that pull, that restlessness, that lack of peace. It may show up as anxiety, frustration, or confusion. That's not always because life is chaotic. Sometimes it's because your soul is fighting against divine order. God's authority is not meant to restrict us. It's meant to protect and direct us. When we live under His covering, we are living in the safest place possible. The enemy wants you to believe that freedom comes from doing your own thing, going your own way, making your own rules. But that's a trap. The truth is, the most liberated life is the one fully submitted to God. Why? Because when you align with His authority, you gain access to His peace, His power, and His provision. Think about Jesus during the storm in Mark 4. The disciples were panicking while the boat was being tossed by the wind and waves. But Jesus was asleep, resting calm, completely unbothered. Why? Because He knew who He was, and He knew who His Father was. He was in total alignment with the will of God, and therefore He had nothing to fear. That same peace is available to us when we stop trying to control every outcome and start trusting the one who does. When you live under God's authority, you stop reacting to life and start responding to God. You don't let every storm shake you. You don't let every delay distract you. You don't let every problem define you. Instead, you move with confidence, not because you know the plan, but because you know the planner. And when He says, be still, you can be still. When He says, go, you can go. When He says, wait, you can wait. Because peace doesn't come from the situation, it comes from submission. The enemy will always try to use disorder to steal your peace. But when you stay in alignment with God, the peace He gives is untouchable. Philippians 4:7 calls it the peace that surpasses all understanding. It doesn't make sense to the natural mind, but it guards your heart and mind like a shield. That's what happens when your soul is sensed with heaven's authority. You may still face storms, but they won't wreck your spirit. You may still walk through fire, but you won't come out burned. Because peace is not found in the absence of trouble. It's found in the presence of alignment. When you truly believe God is in control, your worship changes. It's no longer just about what you feel or what you're going through. It becomes about who He is, regardless of your circumstances. Worship becomes deeper, more powerful, more authentic. You stop waiting for everything to be perfect to lift your hands or open your mouth. You praise in the storm, you sing through the tears, and you rejoice even in the valley. Why? Because your worship is not dependent on your situation. It's rooted in your revelation of God's sovereignty. God's control over the whole world means He's worthy of worship at all times. Psalm 3:4 says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. That doesn't say when I understand, or when I'm comfortable, or when I see the breakthrough. It says at all times. That includes the hard times, the confusing times, and the heartbreaking times. It includes the nights when you cry yourself to sleep, and the mornings when you wake up with more questions than answers. When you believe that God is sovereign, your praise doesn't need an explanation. It just needs a decision. Worship is an act of surrender. It's saying, God, I don't have to see it to believe you're working. I don't have to understand it to know you're good. I don't have to feel it to declare that you are still God. That's powerful worship. That's what Paul and Silas did in Acts 16 when they were beaten and thrown into prison. Instead of complaining, they started worshiping. And as they praised God, the prison shook, the chains broke, and the doors flew open. But here's what's important. Their worship wasn't a reaction to freedom. It was a declaration before the breakthrough. That kind of worship only comes from someone who knows who's really in charge. When you realize that God sits on the throne and nothing can dethrone Him, not people, not circumstances, not even the devil, your worship becomes untouchable. It's not based on your mood or your moment. It's built on the foundation that God reigns and His rule is final. You worship because He's worthy, period. Whether He delivers you now or later, whether He says yes or no, whether He opens the door or allows it to stay shut, He's still worthy. Worship also shifts your perspective. When you lift your eyes to God, you stop being consumed by what's around you. You might still be in the fire, But worship reminds you that there's a fourth man walking with you. You might still be facing giants, but worship reminds you that the battle belongs to the Lord. You might still be standing in front of a mountain, something divine, but worship reminds you that your God moves mountains. It's not just a song, it's spiritual warfare. It's your declaration that God is greater, higher, wiser, and stronger than anything you're facing. And when you worship, something changes in you. The atmosphere in your heart shifts. Peace enters. Joy rises. Strength returns. That's why the enemy fights your worship so hard. Because he knows it brings heaven into your situation. He knows that a worshiper who understands God's authority is dangerous. Something divine, because that kind of person doesn't need a reason to praise. They just need a moment. So if you believe God is in control, let your worship reflect it. Don't wait for things to get better. Worship while they're still broken. Worship in advance. Worship by faith. Not because your world is perfect, but because you serve a perfect God who rules over the whole world. And he's still worthy, still holy, still faithful, still good. That truth alone is enough to lift your hands, raise your voice, and offer a praise that shakes things loose inside you and around you.